There are many other states in the country that are currently shifting to sales tax on fuel rather than per gallon just because of this change in buying power. So, like I said, the funding would go through the existing constitutional formula. And in the area of trunk highways, it would leverage trunk highway bonding in two programs that are really important to the CGMC, and this is Corridors of Commerce and TED, Transportation Economic Development. It would provide $200 million a year for 4 years for the Corridors of Commerce program and $50 million a year for 4 years for the TED program. So the transit component of the Move Minnesota bill, it would increase the metro area sales tax for transit by 3/4 cent, because it's now currently 1/4 cent. That would raise $335 million a year, and a portion of this would actually be used to improve the bike and pedestrian systems in the metro area as well. And for Greater Minnesota Transit, it would dedicate the full motor vehicle lease tax to transportation. Currently, a portion of that goes to transportation funding, split 50-50 between Greater Minnesota Transit and support for some suburban highways. But $32 million is still set aside going into the general fund. We're trying to capture that $32 million and get a little more for Greater Minnesota Transit and these suburban highways. In terms of bike and pedestrian funding for Greater Minnesota, the bill just recommends using some of the flexible federal funding to improve bike and pedestrian infrastructure in Greater Minnesota. So, like I said, this bill began its path in the last legislative session. We had several hearings before session and during session examining the state's transportation needs. And the Move Minnesota bill actually did pass out of both the Senate and House transportation committees, but they were partisan votes, only DFL support. And it became clear pretty early on that the governor and Speaker Thiessen were not all that interested in raising taxes to support transportation during an election year. They did make modest transportation investments in their supplemental budget and bonding bill, which I'll just quickly outline here. There was $33 million for the local bridge replacement program. There was some earmarking for a large metro bridge, so there was about $21 million available for statewide solicitation. The local road improvement fund got $54.3 million. 3 earmarks in there, but $22 million for statewide solicitation there. The Corridors of Commerce program funding, thanks a lot, to push from some Greater Minnesota legislators. We were able to get some money in the supplemental budget for that, $6.5 million in fiscal year 14 and $25 million in fiscal year 15. And kind of our messaging behind that was there aren't a lot of projects out there that are shovel ready, so we need to make some investments in engineering, right-of-way acquisition, to get these projects ready to go so that when we do pass a large transportation investment, we can turn them around more quickly. So of that $6.5 million in Corridors of Commerce that we got for this year, MnDOT at the end of June announced how they would spend that. A portion went to Highway 14 for right-of-way acquisition between Owatonna and Dodge Center. A portion went to Highway 23 for some environmental work for their expansion around Paynesville. Highway 34 will get a new center turn lane in Detroit Lakes, and Highway 2 reconstruction near Duerr River. MnDOT has said that they plan to announce the other $25 million in projects later this fall. I'm getting together with them next week to see if I can get a little bit more of a definite timeline there, but they've said project readiness is going to be a key factor in how they invest this money. So again, right-of-way design and engineering work is going to be where they're going to focus these dollars. So looking ahead to next session, as you heard last night, Speaker Thiessen and also Governor Dayton have publicly said that transportation is going to be a top priority in 2015 if they're reelected. But again, as Jeff Johnson said, transportation is likely to be a major focus of the session, no matter which party controls the House and Governor's office. But I do think the approaches that they take to dealing with the transportation issue will depend on which party is in control. And these are just kind of my thoughts on what will happen depending on who is in control. So if we have a shift in the Governor's office or the House to GOP control, like Jeff Johnson said, they'll likely favor road versus transit funding. But I think we have to remember that might be a message that sounds appealing out there, but like we said, everything's kind of broken down in formula in the Constitution. So there's only so much wiggle room that can be done, you know, within existing funding to move money from transit to roads. So I think we need to remember that. I think the GOP would push for more reform in how current funds are being spent and finding more efficiencies within MnDOT. I think a revenue increase is probably less likely, though there are some GOP members that have said they would support a modest increase in the gas tax. And it's also been, many members have said that they would support shifting funding from other areas of the general fund budget to transportation, and that was something that Jeff Johnson noted yesterday. I guess the question there is what would they shift from, and is that other priorities of cities? So we kind of have to watch that. If the DFL were to remain in control, I would say a revenue increase of some sort is very likely. May not necessarily be this Move Minnesota package, but I think there's going to be a definite push and pull between members who would want to see a long-term solution and those that are kind of hesitant to increase taxes. So are they going to do something big, or are they going to just do something that they think won't get them in trouble? If the Minnesota Chamber comes on board and expresses support for any sort of transportation package, I would say that'll be what's passed, because I think that members would find some solace in knowing that they wouldn't be criticized from the chamber. And I think within the metro area legislators, especially if the DFL is in control, there will be some infighting on how to use that metro sales tax. What percentage, because some folks only want to increase it by 0.5 cent, some want it 3/4 cent. How it's spent, some of these suburban legislators would like to see some of that money go to roads, not just transit. So last session there was the beginning of that, lots of infighting, and I think we'll see much more drama to come there. So in other news, some of you may have received these invitations, but the League of Minnesota Cities, Metro Cities, and CGMC have been involved in establishing a task force of mayors to address street funding. As you know, only cities over 5,000 get municipal state aid street funding from the constitutional formula, and that only supports 20% of the streets in those communities. And at the end of the day, 84% of all city street funding is from property taxes, or LGA. Hence why we've named this task force the 84% Coalition. And so the objective of this group, which was kind of called together by St. Paul Mayor Chris Coleman, because the legislators were in his city during the session and were experiencing firsthand his potholes, came under a lot of fire, that he decided he wanted to take some leadership on local transportation funding. So he has convened a group of 20 mayors that will discuss options for transportation funding for local city streets throughout the fall. 3 meetings are scheduled to kind of go over these. There's a good balance in membership between Greater Minnesota and Metro mayors, cities above 5,000, cities below 5,000, just so everybody's represented in this discussion. And the first meeting is going to be held August 28th, next week, in Nicollet. Nicollet Mayor Fred Freilich is actually the co-chair with Chris Coleman. And we're hoping that from this discussion, You know, we're going to have a lot of input from the staffs, a lot of input from some other expert organizations that we can come up with some concrete recommendations to be incorporated in this 2015 transportation package. And, you know, we've included Move Minnesota in these discussions. They know we're working on this, and I think there's some openness to making sure that cities are getting a fair share in this transportation bill. So I'll be attending all of these meetings, and then they'll be done with by the time our fall conference comes along. So I will report back to you kind of what the slate of recommendations might be out there. And in terms of the CGMC mayors that have received an invitation to participate, there's quite a few of you in the room right now, but Bemidji, Duluth, Eveleth, Marshall, Owatonna, Olivia, Rochester, Roseau, and Wadena. So also, as we look forward to next session, I think as a transportation bill is being formulated, we want to remember the programs that are funding priorities for the CGMC. And this includes the TED program, which I touched on before, but it's been a very successful program to help a lot of our member cities build needed interchanges. Corridors of commerce, I think there's a broad recognition, you know, almost all of our cities have one that either runs through their community or is nearby and is kind of really essential to local economic development and the flow of commerce. Over 120 projects were nominated for funding of the original Corridors of Commerce program in 2013, and of that, obviously only enough funding for 10. So there's a lot of need out there, and so we're going to continue to push for continued funding of this program.